Hi, my name is Beth and I'm the sewing pattern designer and blogger at Sew DIY. In today's video, I'm going to show you the 3 steps that I use to tackle and conquer my scrap bin. I know for me that scraps can get really overwhelming. I want to make use of every last bit of fabric, but sometimes I just don't know what to do with them. So in this video, I'm going to show you the 3 steps that I use to tackle the scrap bin and start feeling better right away. Let's get started. So step 1 is to define categories for your scraps. This can be using your scraps for projects such as quilts or garments. You can color block garments or make children's clothing. You can also make a lot of really small projects that just use a little bit of fabric. I have a whole blog post with 101 ideas about how to use fabric scraps, and I'll put a link to that down in the show notes. You can also use your scraps to stuff something. Like if you want to make your own tailor's ham, you can use your fabric scraps to fill up your tailor's ham. You could also make a big kind of tuffet, a thing like a footstool, put all your scraps in there. That's a great way to use up a lot of scraps. You can also donate your fabric scraps. Look for a local charity that accepts fabric scrap donation, or maybe you have a place in your area that accepts fabrics for recycling. Those are really great options. Another way to get rid of some of your scraps is to compost them. So composting fabric works best with linens or cottons. You want to use natural fibers, and even wool will compost. It's even better if your fabrics have only natural dyes. So if you have a home compost, that's a really fun way to use your fabric scraps, especially the tiny ones that won't be useful for sewing a project. And if you don't have access to recycling or composting, or the fabric just isn't suitable for those things, you can also just throw them away. If you're looking to extend the life of a certain fabric and do something a little different with it, you might consider dyeing the fabric. It can give you really cool fabrics that are going to look different than what you've already used and might inspire you to make a new project. Here I have a bunch of muslin fabric that I'm planning to dye with avocados. We'll see how that goes. You can also use bits of leftover fabric for muslining future projects. After you define your categories, you're going to want to get some bins or bags. Just a simple grocery bag will do just fine, and designate a category to each bin or bag. All right, step 2, this is when you organize your scraps. Now it's time to get that bin and just dump all those scraps out on the table and sort through them. So you're going to want to look first and see, what is this fabric appropriate for? What category is it going to go into? Is this going to work really well for a quilt? Maybe this could work for a child's garment. Decide that kind of thing, and then also look at how big the scrap is. Something that's this big can be used for another project, but a little strip of fabric like this can't really be used in another project. So this might go into your stuffing category, your trash category, recycling, or your composting, depending on what is accessible to you. Step number 3 is to stitch or store. So the scraps that are designated for trash, recycling, or composting, those can each go to their designated locations. And then everything that's being saved for a project, you're either going to want to use it right away or find a good way to store it. I have a whole video where I give you a peek inside my scrap bin and how I've organized it, and I'll link that right up here so you can go check that out. But my number one biggest tip about storing your scraps is to store them as flat as possible. So here's a little pile of scraps, and this one I would just store it like this if I can. So flat scraps means that I have to iron them less later. So it's all about saving myself time and being able to quickly go through and see what I have When it's just in like a big jumble in a bag, it's harder to find exactly what's there, and then everything gets really wrinkled, and I'm just going to be spending more and more time ironing those fabrics before I can use them. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that little video about how I tackle my scrap pile. My favorite way to use scraps is to make improvisational quilts like these. I'm planning a whole e-course about how to make these quilts, and if you're interested in that, I have a newsletter that you can sign up for to be the first to be notified when that course releases. The newsletter is very infrequent, and it's really only about using scraps, sustainability in sewing, and in the future about my improvisational quilts e-course. It's going to be a really fun course. It's a different kind of way to sew than most garment sewers are used to, but it's something that I really love doing. It's a really different way to express myself creatively than making garments. So I highly recommend that you sign up for that newsletter and get notified for when this course is released. And if you haven't already, I would be so honored if you hit the little subscribe button below and then hit the bell to be notified every time I release a new video. Happy sewing!